Great meetings are full of great conflict. In fact, I often go so far as to say, if there's no conflict, why is there a meeting? But there's a big difference between meetings that are full of great conflict and meetings that are full of unhealthy conflict that just slows everything down. So, what's the difference? And how do you manage conflict in meetings to get more of the good stuff and less of the crappy stuff? So, first of all, let's think about the difference between what is good and healthy and what is unhealthy conflict. I think about good conflict as tension. So think about it as, oh, somebody pulling you to think about an issue from a different direction or from a different vantage point or perspective. Oh, it's not how you walked in the room, it's not how you want to think about it, it's uncomfortable, but oh, it stretches you and helps you think more comprehensively and therefore to help the team get to a better decision. So tension is uncomfortable kind of conflict, but it's a healthy kind of conflict. The opposite is friction. And that's where the conflict feels personal, feels like we're just grinding on the same issue without making any progress at all. So, what you want to do in managing conflict in your meeting is to dial up the amount of that tension and productive conflict while minimizing the amount of that negative friction. So, how do you do that? Well, let's start with dialing up the good parts. So, the key thing is to understand that conflict is a feature, not a bug in teams. It is the getting at those very different perspectives that are all the trade-offs and things we have to solve for when we have limited resources and we have to get the best outcome we can. So understanding that the deliberations in a meeting are really about optimizing scarce resources given a whole bunch of different priorities. So if that's the case, what you want to do is you want to make sure, first of all, that everyone's clear what you're trying to solve for. So anything you can do, even if it's not your agenda item, to just say, I just want to make sure we all agree on what we're solving for here. You can look to the chair of the meeting, you can ask the person who's the sponsor of that particular item, or if nobody kind of makes eye contact with you, you can say, well, my sense is that this is what we're solving for, and start there. Next, you can solicit the kind of diverse perspectives that are in the room. So, unhealthy conflict kind of erupts when people don't feel they have a forum to share the things that matter to them. So if you're in there making sure everyone has a chance to be heard and share their unique take on the problem, that's going to promote positive conflict and stop you from getting into that negative friction. So ask for their input. So you can name it directly. Hey, Frank, you're the only person in the room who's comes from the field. And we're building out this beautiful program, but I'm not sure it's going to survive the hectic life in the field. Can you share your thoughts on this from that perspective? So ask for their diverse input. Next, in understanding and creating positive conflict, Frank may say something that everyone else is really annoyed at. So say you're launching a new performance management system and the folks at head office have designed some brilliant, best in class leading system it's going to take an hour per person to work through. Frank's input might be that, you know what, there's no way my folks need to spend an hour, off the road, not selling, not helping people to fill out this sort of performance appraisal form. It's not going to happen. And you may see everybody in the room just start to be like, but this is the best forum. And so it's really valuable in managing that conflict to say, okay, what I hear you saying is that an hour is too much time. So take me through your thoughts about, how much time you can devote, how frequently we should do this, what are your thoughts? So you're giving Frank a chance to bring more of his diverse input, but for everyone in the room to understand what's beneath his opinion or his point of view. And once he's had a chance to answer that, then again, you can add a lot of value by saying, okay, so what I'm hearing from you is it would be much better. It's not the hour of time that's the issue. It's an hour all at once. It would be great if we could come up with a way to break that up into smaller interactions because the folks in the field have, monthly touch points and we could break it up. Okay. So then what you've done is you've helped make sure that Frank feels heard and understood and that there isn't misinterpretation of what he's asking for floating around in the room. Then it's perfectly okay to add your truth to that or add somebody else's truth to that. When you do that, you're saying, okay, Frank, we hear you. So it can't be, a big chunk of time. It can't be a full hour. The field, the spans of control in the field are too big, and that's just not going to work. But you like the idea of having a performance conversation, and you think it needs to be more in short stints. Okay. Here's what I'm thinking about in this situation. I'm thinking more about less about the duration and more about the quality of the interaction. And how do we make sure there's enough time that they can really have a conversation? There's room for back and forth. That's kind of what I'm paying attention to. So, what you've done in that case is you've heard Frank's truth, made him feel that, okay, this matters, but you've added to it your own piece of the puzzle. And now what you want to do is talk about this in, okay, so now we got to solve for all these things. We need a system that supports our compensation and our promotion system. It needs to be in bite-sized pieces so that it makes sense in the field. It needs to be based on not something formulaic, but a great dialogue. Okay, guys, what can we do with the proposal to kind of get us closer to that? In doing that, you become someone who helps frame up problems and challenges to solve, and gets it away from feeling like a fight between adversaries. So that's a huge technique. All right. So those are the things you can do to promote productive conflict, making sure everyone in the room knows what they're solving for and they're all solving for the same thing, inviting diversity of thought and differences of opinion, but making sure that the people feel heard and feel that the things that matter to them are understood by the room, and adding your own to that, and then reframing into something that's about problem solving, not fighting. Those are all positive things. So, how do you reduce the friction? That's really big. So, one of the things that happens all the time is people don't listen very effectively. And when they don't listen very effectively, they kind of miss each other and often feel like they're disagreeing with one another when they aren't really disagreeing at all. Sometimes they're saying the same thing in different words. Sometimes one person's saying this thing and one person's saying a totally different thing. They're not mutually exclusive, but they're kind of stuck in their own. So if you can be the person to help them hear each other better. So lots of times when you can say, if I'm hearing you correctly, I'm not sure you're disagreeing. Are you saying this and you saying this? Or you can broker conversations, which reduces friction. The other thing is if there's somebody in the room who's starting to get emotional because they aren't feeling heard or they aren't feeling like their points are being respected, you can kind of loan your credibility, loan your space in the meeting to helping them feel heard and understood. If they're really emotional, what you can often do is help them translate that emotion. Because when people hear things like, that's way too rushed, like we can't do anything with 15 minutes, that's way too rushed. Well, you can often help them say, okay, when you say rushed, how are you thinking about this? Which part do you think is particularly rushed? Well, maybe we could do this part and this part in 15 minutes, but this section where it's about feedback from other people, I don't think there's any way we can do that in 15 minutes. Okay, so it's not the whole thing that's rushed. You're feeling like only allocating 15 minutes for this particular step is the issue. Then we kind of, you take the air out of that emotional balloon, just calm everything down a little by translating people's emotions. So that could be really, really helpful. You can also loan your credibility to somebody who's a minority voice in the conversation who you feel isn't being heard. That can create a lot of friction, and you being willing to say, hey, I think we need to go back to what Sally was saying. I think that was valuable. And I think we need to listen. So those are really valuable things you can do. The last thing you can do is really help your team stick the landing. One of the big problems in managing conflict in meetings is that we don't close the conversation effectively, often because we're trying to cram in one more thing in a short meeting agenda or running off in different directions. But when we don't close the meeting effectively, well, the problem then is that people walk off without clarity about who was going to do what. And then they often get frustrated and mad at each other, thinking that they didn't deliver when that's not the case at all. So just make sure that before everybody leaves, can we just be clear? What did we say we're doing? Who are we communicating to? When is the deadline? Who is on point for this? those sorts of questions to manage the conflict by sticking the landing with a good ending to it. So meetings are supposed to be all about having productive conflict. So there are things you can do to dial that up, but it's also really important that you keep that negative, unhealthy conflict to a minimum, and then wrap it all up by sticking the landing with clarity about who's committing what, to whom, for whom, by when, all those sorts of things. That's how you manage conflict to have a great meeting.